Hello, welcome to Instrumental Breakthrough Podcast. I am your host, Daniel Shankin. I'm also the founder of Mount Tam Psychedelic Integration, which co-produces this with Deadhead Land, which is a online live music venue where you can watch live streams all day and all night from musicians all around the world. And we're co-produced by Livestream Remote, who's running our tech for us. One more thing about Tam Integration, we offer psychedelic integration, education, and coaching. If you want to support the podcast, that would be awesome. You can go to Apple and write us a review. You're also welcome to support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Tam Integration. Deadheadland also has a Patreon. I'm really happy to be able to talk to my guest today. Being that I recently moved to Massachusetts, he's a Massachusetts-based musician and has even written books about the history of rock and roll in the Massachusetts area. He's a member of the band Hallelujah the Hills and the author of Astral Weeks, A Secret History of 1968. Welcome, Ryan Walsh.
Thank you so much. Hello, from Boston, Massachusetts.
Boston, Massachusetts, fantastic. Being that I'm now also a Massachusetts resident, and most of the music history that I'm familiar with, coming from the Bay Area, is Bay Area music history, which is very, very rich. And doing some research, kind of poking around in your book and listening to other interviews you gave, there's some fun and interesting musical history that happens in Boston that also seems to intersect with psychedelic history.
That's right. And it was a surprise to me that this history existed when I got started on the book, because growing up around here and going to shows and being a musician, it all seemed like it started at Aerosmith. Like no one had a memory before that. Those stories weren't shared. And so when I started flipping over rocks, I was so surprised about how interesting and rich and weird it was.
Mm-hmm.
And, I always say by the time you're 30, you've accidentally seen a dozen documentaries about the 60s. And they certainly mention the Bay Area and New York. But Boston was just never mentioned. So I thought this was a new old story to tell.
Right. Now, I do want to get back to that, but really, today's about you, right? The tagline of the podcast is Psychedelic Origin Stories of Your Favorite Rock and Roll Superheroes. And today, that rock and roll superhero is you.
Wow.
And so why don't you just, tell us kind of a little bit about the psychedelic origin stories, how plant medicines or sacred science or, your explorations in consciousness have turned you into this kind of beautiful being of divine love and creativity that we are beholding in this moment.
Okay. That is maybe the most beautifully phrased question I've ever had in an interview. And it's probably a complex, long answer. I think the first time I heard about psychedelics was Bill Hicks, the comedian, who was this huge proponent of it. And he was funny as always about it, but he had really seemed changed and expanded by it. And that was very compelling to me. And then, of course, in his bits about that, he talks about Terence Mckenna. And I said, well, who's that? And then I start reading and listening to Terence Mckenna. And kind of the first lesson was like, this is not a joke and nothing to be cavalier about. And it's not a party. And so I feel pretty lucky that I had that in me from the get-go. I think a lot of people don't, and you can get into choppy waters and trouble. But I would say, I guess we'll skip marijuana, right? I mean, I think the first psychedelic I took was definitely psilocybin. And the first couple times was pretty mild. And but the third time was very significant. And it almost felt like these barn doors right here on my chest opened up. And I just felt renewed. I saw the world again as I did as a child, but I still had adult wisdom. And I was with this great group of friends in the woods, and it was just like insight after insight, and I immediately knew part of the challenge was, what can you bring back? Like, what can I remember? What's worth remembering? Is that part of it? And and I started to ask my friend the phrase, "Do you know how to wave backwards to Massachusetts?" And I said, and that's if you don't know, that's the name of a song off our first record, "Wave Backwards to Massachusetts." And it was just about, it was a way to talk about how we were somewhere else but still there. And but I was very nervous to ask him. It was funny and beautiful, and that's where that song came out of. So that was kind of the first big breakthrough.
Well, that's very sweet, because one of the things that I think of just when you say that is oftentimes when people are moving away from it, like the metaphor, like kind of the archetypal poetic thing, when people are sort of leaving a place and they're sort of leaning, it's almost like it's like that cowboy story of shooting behind you as you're running away.
Right. Yeah.
And so waving is different.
Yeah. 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 It's like something you say on the way out or the way in. Yeah. And it's also about knowing you can go home. I think, that's always important to remember. A lot of people freak out. Am I going to be like this forever? Of course. So I think it's about that too. Yeah. In the song, "Goes way backwards to Massachusetts, we'll sing a crooked path back to our home." So.
Right. Lovely. And so you had already been making music for a while, right? When you kind of dipped your toe into these psilocybin infested waters.
Mm-hmm.
And so did it give you, so it sounds like what happened is it gave you a new perspective on the things that you had already written.
Well, maybe it did. I can't recall, but it definitely changed the way I did write. There was a moment at that trip that was scary at the end. But when I got through it, I had less fear.
Right.
And that seeped over into my creativity. I always felt shy about saying, "Well, I'm a artist. I'm a creator." I always thought there was a little something about putting on airs, and that's probably my baggage.
Right.
But after that, I felt more like no, it's okay. You are doing this. You've been doing this for a long time, and it's okay to say you are doing it. And so I became more ambitious with creativity at that crossroads. Yeah.
Right. So now, so here's the thing. I might try to tap on this looking back thing again, because I just think it's interesting. Looking back, are there any songs or pieces of work that you've done where you can see that you held back?
Oh, yes. I think a lot of the early songs are playing with words, and just language play. Sort of a hesitation to put myself in the song.
Right.
And so that started to evaporate, and that's still an ongoing process. I mean, I think our last record, last 2019's You. It's called You.
Mm-hmm. A very psychedelic concept in and of itself.
Exactly, yeah. And I had all the different ways You worked. It was like, well, you can look at a picture of yourself as a child and say, I'm you. That works.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can look at the person you're most close to in the world and connected to and say, I'm you, you're me. Or it could be a disassociative thing that's bad. I just had all the, I thought this is so multi-use. The phrase is, I'm going to hinge the whole album on that concept. But anyways, you could always, with all of our records before that, you could tell there was certainly a human being behind the song. And you could maybe learn some things about me, but that was probably the most, naked about who I am and where I was.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I like this idea of putting yourself in the song.
Yeah. Songs are, it's interesting because you do want to put yourself in the song, but you want everyone else to be able to inhabit that song as themselves.
Right.
I always say, like, I think songs, there are so many things that can be psychedelic experiences that, don't require ingesting anything. And I really think music is one of them. I mean, in a great song that you love and you listen to closely and you sing yourself, you kind of step into that world and become the singer sometimes.
Right.
It's like they are little like transportation devices. So I always try to leave doors open. If it's just a diary about me and my special feelings and details, then I don't think it's as good of a song as it could be. Right.
Well, I'm just curious as to if we're all, if I'm you and you're me,
right?
Probably your special feelings are also my special feelings. And where does and how can we trust that more?
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a dance.
It's a dance. Yeah.
You're reminding me of some show that I went to with some band, a popular band, or at least popular amongst hippies, And I forget what the name of it was, but they were like, we're Van Morrison and so are you. Whatever the name of the band was. But
oh yeah.
But it wasn't of course Van Morrison. It was, wasn't Counting Crows. We're Counting Crows and so are you. But the idea was that like it was this whole big one thing that that we're traveling in together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think any band that effectively communicates with an audience and is good and is not purely ego driven, they know so acutely how the audience are the other half of the band.
Right.
And if you've watched some of these live streams during this terrible pandemic, where there's no audience, some of my favorite bands fall flat. And because the secret ingredient is the energy of the audience, and it's not there. Right. So I'm into that sentiment.
I had one friend who used to say he was a professional dancer for the Grateful Dead, and he tested LSD for the CIA.
Nice work if you can get it.
Yeah, that's good work. I don't think it paid well.
Oh, all right. He tested it for the CIA?
Yeah. Well, it worked. And then he would say, it works.
It is, yeah. Well, I mean, a whole chapter in the book is about the birth of the American psychedelic revolution, which again starts a little earlier than I think the myth that we easily can regurgitate kind of indicates. And, the first hit of LSD taken in America was in Boston, and it was in the 50s, and it was just these doctors at a psychiatric hospital. Mm-hmm. And they heard about, and as we all know, no one knew what LSD was first. Is it a telepathy thing? Is it a truth serum? People didn't know, but they thought it maybe would help schizophrenics. So these two doctors ordered from Sandoz, and it arrived, and they knowingly dosed their superior. And he was like, all right, I'm going to go do my rounds.
He thought he was just going to do rounds.
Yeah, and then things get stranger, and then they were doing everything from, administering it to patients to putting it in the punch bowl at the hospital holiday party.
Mm-hmm.
And but before you knew it, the CIA came around and had some questions, and got involved, and
Mm-hmm.
that's been going on ever since.
Right, and we know that the Good Friday experiment is maybe one of the most famous experiments that happened around there.
Yeah, I was so lucky to interview Gunther Weil, who was there, and
Mm-hmm.
he was a close partner of Leary's at the time. And I had also been in Marsh Chapel so many times as a BU student, and always was kind of attracted to it, and to learn about what happened in the basement was so beautiful. And just to tell your listeners, it was a Leary Harvard sponsored experiment where they gave half the graduate students psilocybin and half placebos in the basement of Marsh Chapel while a service was
specifically sort of religious studies students.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
And people with a religious bent.
Yes. They were primed for this experience, you might say. And there was a church service going on upstairs. It was being piped in audio wise. And people had profound experience. One person felt he had a message from God and had to deliver it, and ran out of the church and grabbed a postman and crumpled up his mail and said, "These messages are irrelevant." And they had to bring him back inside. But people reported it was a profound religious experience. They classified it as religious. And Rick Doblin for MAPS, if anyone's interested, is interviewed anyone who's still alive who's willing, I think, several times. And it's pretty interesting to track their life after that.
Right. And one of the things that I think is cool is that the Johns Hopkins people, because apparently, there were some problems with the study, like the rigor of the study left something to be desired.
Oh, absolutely.
For people who are really into rigorous research. And so the Johns Hopkins people did a very similar experiment with psilocybin.
Mm-hmm.
And by this time they had categories of positive experience and categories of negative experience, like death anxiety, negative experience, disassociation, negative, not knowing really where you are, not enjoying that, it's negative, whereas things like ineffability, feelings of oneness, connection to God, these sorts of things, positive experience. And for everybody who takes the study, there's a certain percentage of people who have the positive and the negative or both. And they gave the psilocybin to long-term meditators and other kind of religiously minded people. And they, of course, had fewer of the negative side effects and more of the positive side effects, which is kind of cool.
Right. Yeah. It would suggest they've done some prep work, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that really speaks to the importance of mindset, because when everybody talks about set and setting, the focus seems to be on setting.
Mm.
It's like we have the candles, we have the tapestry. We turned our phones off, but like people overlook mindset. Is like, okay, yes, sure, you didn't fight with your wife today, but it's deeper than that.
Yeah. I am very aware of that, and there's plenty of time. In fact, I'd say the windows for it are the rare thing,
mm-hmm.
where you are together and whole enough and strong enough to say, well, I'm sturdy enough right now to do this intense, sometimes scary check-in.
Right.
Yeah.
And then that also, brings to the fact that sort of we're talking as what Johns Hopkins would refer to as healthy normals.
Okay.
And that a lot of the research and the medicinal therapeutic stuff is being created for people who are having a really, really hard time managing their state.
Right.
You know, we're talking to people who, you know, with PTSD, maybe from war, you know, veterans, and people with like severe depression, or who have history of abuse, or, you know, who, you know, are dying from cancer, or things of that nature, who have tried lots of things. You know, I talk to lots of people who are like, I tried meditation, I tried yoga, you know, I still want to slip my wrists, you know. And so, and I think it speaks to kind of the power also of intention, and people's desire to want to heal, and also the power of these medicines, that those people often turn corners.
Mm.
You know, the people who are in like really, really bad states of mind can find relief.
Yeah, it's a real thing. It's sad how long we had to wait for the serious research and proper usage to resume.
Yes.
You know, Leary is a crazy cowboy, but he really fucked things up for the, you know, the potential of societal acceptance of this.
Mm.
You know, decades of complete criminality, unable to study it. So yeah, I mean, anything that helps people, I'm excited about the prospect of it helping people with these problems that are can seem insurmountable. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tell me, I'm not super familiar with the band.
Hmm.
You know, I was introduced to you, I think, mostly as the author of the book.
Okay. Yeah.
And I've heard a little, I saw some kind of sweet quarantine things that you did live stream with other people that was kind of fun and inspiring. And it sounds to me like you were doing some of the journeys that you were doing with your bandmates.
There's been some of that in that story I told earlier. A couple of them were there,
Mm-hmm.
and well, I'll tell you, we started the band in late 2005.
Mm-hmm.
We named it after an early 60s experimental movie called Hallelujah the Hills
Mm-hmm.
that I saw in film school that I really loved, and kind of had this ethos and spirit that I thought would apply to the band.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been together for a long time, and we get to explore creativity, about where we want to go as a band all the time, and I find it a very positive thing, and enough people really love it and find value enough for us to keep doing it and not think of it just as a men's group,
Mm-hmm.
a 5 to 6 person creativity therapy group. Um, but
So I mean, it is therapy in some ways.
well, I find all music and all creativity therapeutic,
Right.
and I don't know. We certainly learn a lot every album we make.
Right.
I would say, um, I mean, this is probably a cliche, but a lot of people will say, "What were you smoking when you wrote that?" Or "How high were you guys when you did this show or that show?" And the answer is usually not.
Right.
um, uh, you know, and that's weird because if you're familiar with this stuff, that the times you are taking a trip, you are on a foraging mission. You're not in the editing, dismantle it, what's useful here phase. That's later, and you need to, I think, be in your normal state. But you know, when a phrase like "wave backwards to Massachusetts" arrives, I did take that back. But when I
Mm-hmm.
said that, the idea that I was writing would be pretty absurd to me. Yeah.
Right. And
And
so how does the medicine enable how does it create more cohesiveness and relationship among the men's group?
No, I'm not sure you could. I mean, I don't want to speak for anyone else but myself.
Oh yeah,
And
I'm not asking them.
I know.
I'm asking you.
Well, I'm not sure that it does,
Hmm.
except if I'm expanding, growing, more open
Hmm.
person as the band leader. I hope I foster closeness and
Hmm.
drive to not never make the same record again and try to sound like us.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
What have you what have you been working on lately? Like what is new? Like what is kind of new and both new and different and still uniquely you that's happening these days?
Well, I'll tell you what. About a year ago, we put out that album "I'm You," and I was very excited about it. And I was very excited about the reaction it was getting. People really seemed to understand what it was about and grasp onto it. And I was very excited to tour it. And our
Yeah.
tour literally started, in early March and ground to a halt because of COVID. In fact, we
Did you
put out
get
a lot.
any
We did 3 or 4 shows. We were supposed to do a lot of states tours. We had Europe planned for the first time ever. It was so exciting. And I think we were at the top of our game as a live band. And but literally, we Friday, March 13th in Washington, D.C., we put that out as a live record, a bootleg live record.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really one of the most surreal, I think, live albums you hear, because we're like, we had sold out the small club, but there were 13 people there
Mm-hmm.
because people are starting to stay home. And we're saying wash your hands from the stage, like we're talking about it, but we clearly only have some of the information.
Right.
And you can hear me have a sense that things are about to shut down. I'm like, I feel like this is like right after 9/11. Like when would you go into a convenience store and you're just buying an apple, but the exchange with the clerk is totally loaded and you're both
Mm-hmm.
just like there looking in each other's eyes. And it's because
It was like when Prince died.
how so?
When Prince died, I just remember being in town and like it was sort of like people were walking down the streets like playing Prince like on their phones in the
Yeah.
streets and things.
Any unifying experience, whether it's positive, mournful, or traumatic,
Yes.
brings these things, heightens every interaction. And
Right.
so I was feeling that. And so I was so glad we had that recording. But then we played one more night in Baltimore the next night, and then we went home and everything shut down. And I initially was so disappointed, but then I started to count my lucky stars, because I had been running on red, the needle in the red, for years. I did the book, and then the book tour, hustle like crazy. And then,
Mhm.
okay, we got to record "I'm You." And then I have to make sure, I do enough interviews, and then we'll tour. And so when suddenly there was a nature mandated stay at home, uh, that was a good thing for me. And I might
Right.
still be in it. I mean, I'm not working on anything. We have outlines of things we want to do, but I kind of think of myself as in a resting period right now. And as I'm saying that, in the last 3 months, we put out one new song. I did a stop motion animation video. So I found ways to work.
That's awesome. Are you doing any sort of book writing now?
No, I had a proposal for a second book
Mm-hmm.
and a offer on the table, but for very sensible reasons and complex reasons, I had to turn it down.
Right. Sure.
I'm sorry to be vague about that, but I
It's
have
okay.
to. And so I'm back at the drawing board with that as well.
It's really interesting because when I think of the late 60s, I think of 67 and 69. I think of 67 as being the summer of love.
Right.
And I think of 69 as being like Woodstock and Altamont.
Right.
Sort of, it's almost like, the kind of the rise and fall. And so I'm not really even sure exactly. I mean, I think maybe the death of the hippie was, the funeral was maybe in 68, might have been in late 67, but I don't really know what was going on there much.
In general or in Boston?
Well, in general, I mean, I guess I'm thinking mostly I in general.
Okay. Well, it's a traumatic year. I mean, it's marked by the deaths of MLK, Kennedy,
Mm,
um, intense Vietnam War protests, and
right.
um, and a lot of psychedelic use, a true culture war, where things. I mean, when I read the source material and I interviewed people, what I got the sense of immediately is that everyone was living their life that year like it was maybe about to end. Like there was a real sense of doom in the air.
Hmm.
And um, that kind of expresses itself in the book in the musical cult that takes up about half the book, called the Mel Lyman family, or the Fort Hill community, um, who they still are, a group of people who, well, Mel Lyman was a folkie, played banjo and harmonica, and he was in the Jim Kweskin Jug Band. After Dylan went electric, he kind of stormed the stage and did a harmonica dirge for the death of folk music, because
Mm-hmm.
Dylan had just killed it, which is funny to me. But he was also tangentially related to the Leary Ramdas scene, or Alpo
Right.
as he was known then. And he was over at Ramdas's kind of first run of a commune over in Newton. But he's a cautionary tale because he saw the power of LSD and he said, I know how I can use this to control people.
Really? I mean, because you hear about perhaps Manson doing that.
Well, in Rolling Stone, they were called the East Coast Manson family,
Okay.
which was perhaps unfair because they hadn't killed him. But but they did do terrible things and scare a lot of people and kidnapping and blah blah blah. But there is a famous quote from famous musician Jim Kweskin in that Rolling Stone expose in the early 70s. The Mansons preached peace and love, and they killed all those people. And we don't preach peace and love, and we haven't killed anyone yet. It's the most devastating yet in a sentence.
Right. Fingers crossed.
But yeah, he knew how to exploit it. He was not there to set everyone free.
So what does that mean, to exploit it? I mean, do you have details on that at all?
Sure. I mean, there are many firsthand accounts of what he would do, whether it was a one-on-one session or he would dose you heavy,
Mm-hmm.
wait till you started to come up and present a terrible problem, and then also be the solution. And so he would scare the hell out of you with whatever it was, and then also solve the problem during your trip. So by the end of
Mm-hmm.
it, he seemed kind of like a god, and he called himself God, and a lot of people agreed, and they all lived in these houses up in Roxbury on Fort Hill, and some of them are still up there, and they have those houses still. And I went into them for the book. They'd let me into that world, and by the time the book was out, they were pretty mad at me.
So he kind of good cop, bad copped you.
He would, yeah.
Yeah. That's
Mhm.
that's a really interesting way of going about things. And it's interesting because, first of all, you would think that most people have enough problems of their own without introducing new ones.
Right.
Do you have an
Or
example of one of these problems? Like, what was the...
there was a lot of, you're not being real. That was a big thing in their group. Like, you're not being real. This is phony. You're not actually showing up. Like, why don't you be real? Like, different ego annihilation things and dismantling of your personality.
Mm-hmm.
And then unrelated to LSD, he would break up families, switch partners on people. Oh, we're on a night schedule now. We sleep during the day. And they were not hippies, like, for sure. They actively said they hated hippies, actually. But
Right. Yeah, that sounds kind of dark.
It is dark, and it got darker. And eventually Lyman just vanished, disappeared. They said they didn't, in the mid 80s, they finally said he died in 78. There's no death certificate. No one knows where the body is. And so that was a real mystery to me. And the two kind of stories and narrators or characters in the book are Van Morrison and Mel Lyman. And I picked those two because at the beginning of the story, Van Morrison is arrived in Boston. He's kind of unknown and in a real tough spot. And Mel Lyman is infamous, and he controls all these people and is written about. And by the end of the story, the positions had swapped, where Lyman had literally vanished and Van was one of the most famous musicians in the world. So I thought to look at 1 year in one city through both of their eyes would yield some interesting results.
What do you think makes Astral Weeks such a unique album?
Oh, so many things. It's time and place. It's lightning in a bottle. I mean, I think the book makes the case that this is a lot of happenstance, a lot of people involved. I mean, he likes to be the sole genius of Astral Weeks, but it's just not true. It's his wife Janet is recording his stream of consciousness demos in the kitchen and notating and putting them in a binder. It's the Boston musicians, these kids basically who he's roped into this, who he test runs things with, and all summer they're playing live. The mystery to me was, how did he go from Brown Eyed Girl to Astral Weeks? There's something missing there, because it's like a bubblegum radio hit and then 8 minutes cosmic expansion jazz folk. And so I wanted to figure out why and how that happened. And there were so many strange stories. It was like John Sheldon, his 16-year-old guitar player, said after a half summer of playing rock shows and Brown Eyed Girl every night, Van came in and said, I had a dream last night that there was no more electricity in the world. And we're going to do that too. We're going acoustic and no more plugging in. So he was making psychedelic proclamations like that. And then some of the best jazz musicians in the world in New York, without any rehearsal, are his backing band on that recording. And right. Louis Merenstein, the producer, deserves so much credit. And he was very smart to do what he did. And that was his last interview before he passed away. It's interesting. I couldn't, if I'd started the book a year later, it wouldn't be the same, because so many people left,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of my favorites. It doesn't, and I think that it kind of defies rationality, right? Sort of like Brown Eyed Girls follows all the rules of what a rock and roll song is.
Right.
And Astral Week follows none of them.
Hold on. Let's get this cat under control. This is Twyla. She's my special friend for 13 years. She's a good
Hi, kitty.
She's a good girl. Right,
for those of you who are listening later, we're
classic cat on the table.
Classic cat on the table. Is that a Hallelujah the Hills song?
That could be a lyric. That wouldn't be a title.
Okay.
But Astral Weeks is, it's so beautiful. There's so much longing and pain, but it's also so pretty. And there's dreaminess to it. in both the sound and the lyrics. And, I was very interested when I finally finished the whole process. Now I knew everything about the book, about the album, every mean thing that had happened, every double cross. And I held the record. I was like, did I ruin my favorite record? And I put it on again, and it transcended all of the details for me. It was still, I could listen to it and still feel instead of think.
Right. I guess that says a lot too. There's a lot of alchemy in that, because I guess as people, probably most people don't know, he sort of escaped to Boston.
That was the first surprise I learned. Why was he here in Boston? Everyone knows Van Morrison from Ireland, or maybe the Bay Area, or in New York. And I was, as a lifelong Bostonian, and as someone who's quickly considered Astral Weeks their favorite record of all time, I was like, what? Why was he here? That was mind-blowing. And what I found out was he was on the run from the mob.
Sure.
And in New York, his producer and manager, Burt Burns, was toying, having a flirtation with the mob and his music career, and then suddenly died of a heart attack in December of 1967. And suddenly, who's left in charge of Van is the mobsters who were circling around the Bang Records label. And so, after some scary run-ins, he came to Boston to hide out and start over.
Right. Well, I mean, you would think that the New York mob would be able to get to you in Boston.
It's a great question, and
it's not really that far away.
It's true, but the sense I got was maybe it wasn't worth it. It wasn't like they were trying to kill him. They just wanted to control his career, and they were doing it by kind of scaring him.
Right.
And so being in another city just gave him time to renegotiate. And in fact, I think one of the managers who we first found here in Boston suddenly said he was in part of the Cosa Nostra, and he was like, oh no, I don't want this again. And but eventually what he wanted out of Bang Records. So Joe Smith from Warner Brothers, Joe Smith, who signed the Grateful Dead, he went to what's the comedian's name?
Was it Lenny Bruce?
Rickles.
Don Rickles?
Don Rickles' manager was connected. And so Joe from Warner Brothers knew he wanted to sign Van Morrison and went to Rickles' manager and said, how do you do this? And they set up, this is how Van was signed to Warner Brothers. Joe walked up 5 flights of stairs in an abandoned warehouse in Manhattan with a sack of $20,000 in the sack. Came across the arranged meeting with 2 guys in suits, mobsters. Dropped the sack. They handed over the contract, and that's how Van got out of that.
Right. That's pretty. It's funny that like Don Rickles is involved somehow. Now all of a sudden,
there's so many of those. Like funny how that's involved. Yeah.
Who else do you think? Who else kind of created in New England or Boston, New England? What are the other psychedelic masterpieces of music?
Well,
history. Well, or not. Just musically.
Well, certainly psychedelic music has this big blossoming moment in Boston in '68, where it's a marketing thing that they tried to force a scene called the Bosstown Sound. And basically they said, oh, well, they worked in the Bay Area. Let's just pick another city. And they picked a city and some bands. And it's funny, psychedelic
Who's
music.
they?
Sorry. His name is Alan Lorber. I usually don't mention his name because the first time I emailed him, he threatened to sue me. He's the guy who wrangled all these psychedelic bands and called it the Bosstown Sound and tried to cash in on it.
Sounds like a gem.
MGM Records, and rightfully so. It's a manufactured scene, so it's kind of the first time the kids call bullshit. They're like, "This is what," and but the kids in the bands are really trying, but like a band called Ultimate Spinach with, these long psychedelic jams that are, if you separate the story and the embarrassment of how it all went down, some pretty cool stuff in there.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to think if I have, from any decade, a masterpiece, a psychedelic masterpiece.
I mean, other than like the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones sophomore recording. Because that's mostly what I think of when I think of, this part of the world.
That's right. Like I said, Aerosmith, Boss Tones, Dropkick Murphys.
I was really pleased to find out that I live 5 minutes from Alice's restaurant.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that I had no idea that 5 minutes that way is the restaurant, and then 5 minutes that way is the church. In the lyrics it says Alice didn't live in the restaurant; she lived in the church down the street. And that Arlo Guthrie took over the church and made his own. He's got his own sort of. They have their own hootenannies and rambles, and they have on Sundays they have a BYOG, Bring Your Own God church service. There's pictures of Indian saints on the walls, and they do, a big Thanksgiving because that's the holiday in the song. And it's all been closed, since I moved here after the pandemic started. So it's all been closed, but I'm very excited to kind of be part of that once it opens again.
Is it still called Alice's Restaurant?
No, now it's called like Mary's.
Mary's.
And in small letters, it says formerly Alice's Restaurant.
Right.
But I don't know why Mary couldn't just check her ego,
Yeah, maybe she was asked to not do it. I don't know.
That's possible that somebody else has the rights to the name Alice's Restaurant in perpetuity.
Right.
But yeah, I haven't eaten there because I'm not eating out much these days. But it's cute that there is sort of that quaint like musical history out this way.
Yeah, the Western Mass has its own thing going on. I mean, it kind of blew my mind to learn, like, in '69, the Velvet Underground would play Western Mass, which is just this kind of association you would never think would mesh.
Right. Why do you think that was? Were they just on vacation? They were looking for gigs, or?
Well, it's another chapter in the book where it's all about the Velvet Underground, for reasons that are contested, just decided no more New York shows. I think they wanted to disassociate from Warhol. And they played Boston all the time. People thought they were a Boston band. And John Cale plays his last show in Boston. Nico plays her last show in Boston before she's fired. And then when Cale was fired, they replaced him with Doug Ewell, a Boston kid who's in a band called the Grass Menagerie. And the Boston Tea Party, this club, would just let them play all the time.
Oh, cool.
And so, but eventually it led to Rosewood Ballroom, I think is the name, in Western Mass. And one of my favorite parts of the story is how the Velvet Underground adopt a mascot in Boston, and it's a young Jonathan Richman. And he just kind of follows them around. He drives them around in his dad's car. And, Sterling Morrison teaches him how to play guitar. It's a pretty sweet story.
Did Jonathan Richman go on to be somebody of note?
Oh, yes. Jonathan Richman in The Modern Lovers, Roadrunner. Remember the movie Something About Mary? Remember the guy playing up in the tree? Who's kind of the Greek chorus? That's Jonathan. He's this wonderful oddball singer-songwriter.
They were in the 80s. Like Modern Lovers was like an MTV band.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, by the 80s, it might have been all over with the Modern Lovers tag, but they are they're pretty important and really great. But Jonathan at a certain point wanted nothing to do with kind of a loud plugged-in electric rock band.
Right. And what year was it that the Velvet Underground went to the Bay Area and found out that they did not get along with the Grateful Dead?
Oh yeah, I think that was much earlier. I love how they were both called the Warlocks.
Like right, they were both called the Warlocks. They both had light shows. They're both considered to be sort of psychedelic and things like that. And they were like, oh, these are two very different flavors of psychedelia.
Right. Yeah. I have to admit, people have tried, but I've never been able to lock into the Grateful Dead. and I love the story, and I love, hearing certain songs, but it has not been for me,
Yeah, I mean, nobody's perfect. Yeah. So, I mean, what do you like nerd out on? Like what band, like if you were to like follow a band around the country, all things being equal,
Yeah. I mean, probably the band I've seen more than any other band, besides local bands who are kind of my friends.
Right.
Not to dismiss the music, some of it's just incredible, but Guided by Voices I've probably seen.
Okay.
And that's a kind of there is a analog to the Grateful Dead where, they've released so many albums, you can just be in that world and never hear the same song twice if you want to.
Right.
And they're wonderfully creative and exciting, and I don't know, that just thrills me, that music.
Right on. So, okay. So Psychedelic Experience is at Guided by Voices concerts. Go.
Oh yeah, yes. I did take some mushrooms on one occasion to see that band. I mean, they're classically known as a beer band or a drinking band, but
Sure.
that was a pretty low dose because I get nervous about being in a huge crowd and
Sure.
being really open. I was going to tell you a story about the one and only time I've tried salvia.
Oh, please. We really don't get enough salvia stories on this podcast.
Okay, good. I thought I wanted to bring something rare to the table. I had a friend. Ooh, okay. So I had read about it online and sent it to a friend, and he ended up just ordering the plant from somewhere and growing it in his backyard. And then, it was right next to a hot tub where he used to go at night alone and kind of smoke pot. And one night he was sitting in that hot tub high, and the plant, he said, started to talk to him. Mm-hmm. And said, you think you ordered me, but I actually chose you, and all this stuff. Kind of incredible, hard to believe event. And I was pretty blown away by this. And so he harvested the plant, and then he started to experience it himself. And it sounded like something I'd want to do or try. And so one night at my apartment with my girlfriend at the time, she was going to be the sitter. I would sit there and, do the smoking version, 3 big hits, and then lay down. And as I started to lay down, I just, you feel it kind of envelop you. And I've also never been a fan of psychedelic art, the patterns, the tropes, the visual, geometric stuff. Mm-hmm. But I was shocked to see it there. I was like, oh, this is why it's associated with this. It appeared before me. Almost was something like I was traveling through. And then I remember I grabbed onto like a table chair, table leg, and I could feel kind of veins inside it. Like it felt like it was a living organism, mm-hmm. which was astounding to me. And, kind of in that moment told my girlfriend, like, we think all of this stuff is inanimate, but it's all alive. It's all alive. And then when I came to, and it's a short trip, it's like, 15 minutes. When I came to, I was just pacing around my house for an hour saying, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Because it was so removed from everyday experience, this reality, that I was stunned that I was able to access it and then come back. And yeah.
And then were there any long-term takeaways?
I think just that. So I think that, yeah, we have to consider things beyond our normal perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Not all the time, not in every moment, but it's worth thinking about. You know, about what this really is. What is life? You know, where we are.
Right. Where are we?
It's a great question.
Where are we? What are we doing?
I started watching that show Quantum Leap again. It was my favorite show when I was a teenager.
I smoked a lot of weed to Quantum Leap
Oh, did you?
when I was like 16 and 17 years old.
It's a beautifully psychedelic show, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I was um, Sam, the main character, has that hologram Al, and he's got his thing that is clearly an iPhone before iPhones existed,
Mm-hmm.
and he's able to, you know, feed him all this info about where he is and what quest he has to finish, and he always asks, "Why am I here, Al?" And I started saying to my friend, can we make that socially acceptable where I can just ask you, why am I here?
Right. Well, I just love that, you know, the why am I here is couched inside this very obvious hero's journey of some kind.
Right.
That something needs to be set right.
Right.
And that he's the guy who can do it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, and it's something I kind of aspire. I looked up to him as a kid.
Yeah.
And even in the middle school yearbook, I think it says most likely to become Sam Beckett, Ryan Walsh.
Most likely to Quantum Leap.
Yeah, which is not a normal superlative. But it's such a sad
thing.
I
was most likely to be on the Muppets.
Maybe we'll both get our chance.
Yeah. Well, this is it. This is my Muppet Show. Welcome to my Muppet Show.
Da, 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 da. Yeah, it's such a he's so selfless, but it's also so sad. He never gets to go home. It's that sacrifice element.
Indeed. And I do think that, you know, if you're in your formative years on a light entheogenic, on some like whatever the bad weed was back in the 90s that we had to smoke, that, you know, it probably, you know, attunes your mind in a certain way, that like that's sort of a way to live, that, you know, doing the right thing and kind of showing up in interesting ways to make magic and is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that show was a pretty good moral compass. I mean, they don't come around too often. And
also, you know, it wasn't, you know, you were talking about the kids in 1968 smelling a rat. That, oh, you know, this is whatever this thing that they're putting together is a joke. This isn't the real deal.
Right. Being aware of marketing.
Yeah. But Quantum Leap was the real deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, because there's a lot of shows that like I can't watch, you know, like this such and such is good, you should watch that. And I'll watch a couple of episodes and I was like, this is all just brainwashing.
Yeah, that's right.
This is all just like how to be a socially acceptable drone in the modern world.
I mean, I don't know if you're familiar, but are you familiar with the final episode of Quantum Leap?
You know, I bet I watched it, but I forget.
It is one of the best things that's ever been on television, in my opinion. It's really something else. I mean, so we're all aware of the premise. Sam has been endlessly leaping into different years, different lives, different people. And he thinks he's part of a science experiment. Mm-hmm. And in the final episode, he leaps into himself. He's himself in the mirror, but he's in a mining town in many decades ago. And all these characters from earlier episodes start to come in, but they're not those characters. They just look like them. And the bartender at the tavern where the whole episode takes place, eventually it's revealed that this is God or the person who's been leaping, Sam. And
Wait, that Sam is God?
no, that the bartender at this place where Sam is left is
Mm.
God, or the person who's been leaving Sam. It's really touching and profound, and
Mm.
it ends with Sam being able to. He's given the opportunity to go back home, but instead he goes to help Al and tell his wife that he's not dead in Vietnam and he's coming home. I'll almost start crying talking, but you should.
I hear that if you start playing Astral Weeks at the third lion's roar of the final episode of Quantum Leap, they sync up.
Try it at home, kids. Yeah.
Have you ever done that? Have you ever played the Pink Floyd album and watched Wizard of Oz?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I tried that. It was fun, and it's to me, it speaks about like how our minds want to find patterns and
Yes.
connect things, but also I think there should be a word for when two unrelated pieces of hugely popular culture become forever unified. Like no one would ever think that the Wizard of Oz and Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon were going to be connected, and now they forever are. I think that's interesting when kind of the remix culture does this
Right.
permanent yielding to each other.
Right. Like the Grey album.
That's right. Yeah.
Which was
yeah.
Well, who did it? Was that
Danger
who did the Black album?
Jay-Z.
Right.
It's Jay-Z and the Beatles, and I think Danger Mouse did the mix.
Right. Well, again, I get, although it's not super disparate because, the Beatles cemented the White Album in culture forever. And then, Prince did a Black album, and then Jay-Z did a Black album. So it's not as if they took the White Album and then something totally random.
Well, but who else did something with the White Album?
Right.
The Mansons heard messages in the White Album, and Piggies is forever associated with that murder. And they're
Really?
Yeah. Helter Skelter. The reason we associate that term with Manson is because of the song.
Oh, right. And did he write it on a wall in blood or something?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Both the Mansons and the cult that I wrote about in the book heard messages to them in the White Album.
Right.
So, and that speaks to, it's a powerful piece of art. People are going to use it like it's the I Ching or tea leaves,
I hate messages to me, man. Never good.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's quite a rabbit hole. That's part of setting, I think, or mindset, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is like, there are no secret messages to you. If I had to give somebody advice, if I had to give somebody about to take a bunch of psychedelics some advice, one of those things would be like, there are no secret messages to you in the records or in the news.
Yeah. I think that's wise. I think feel free to have personal insights based on, you hearing it. But one of my favorite scenes in a documentary is in the Imagine film about John Lennon. There's that American hippie who's kind of sleeping in his bushes around his mansion, and finally they're like, what are you doing on the property? They let him talk to John, and he's like, when you sang you got to carry that weight, I just felt like it was for me. And John's like, Paul wrote that. And he just he's like, I was talking to me. He just gives him this whole spiel about, he explains the creative process to this kid. And it's such a beautiful thing, because he could have played the mystic in that role and been like, maybe I am talking to you, but he just explains to the kid how creativity works and how art works and how we all feel connected to our favorite things, and in a way that can seem like it was tailored for you, but it's wise to really put the brakes on that.
Right. Well, and we were talking about the hero's journey earlier, and that is, an archetypal story. right? With sort of archetypal characters in it. And with that in mind, it's like, especially under the influence, we sort of have access to those realms, and quite often we start playing those parts for each other.
That's right. Yeah.
It's like John Lennon becomes Yoda, becomes Merlin, becomes whoever. And so how do we recognize when that's happening? It's like, oh, I'm on a quest in my mind.
Mm-hmm. I sent, the Joseph, no, the Jungian archetypes, the jester, the sage.
Mm-hmm.
There's 15 of them, I think. And once in a while, I'll send the chart to a friend and go, "Who are you today? Which one are you doing?"
Yeah. Well, which is another fun question. Like, is it okay to ask, what am I doing here? And who am I?
Right.
Exactly. Which reminds me of the Almost Famous movie.
Uh-huh.
Where he says, "Who am I to you?"
Oh, right. Yeah.
And then he ends up doing the laundry.
That's right. Yeah.
Where, speaking of archetypes, where he becomes a golden god, right? The lead singer.
Yeah.
Are there archetypes that you feel like you embody when you're on stage?
Wow. I've never thought of that before. I guess I'm trying to embody someone who's curious and who's on some kind of path and searching and sincere, but hopefully funny, a little bit funny.
Right.
I hate to do this, but I have to step away for 1 minute. I'll be right back. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Do you want to... Oh. All right. He's stepping away. People who are watching us live, do you have any questions? Charles, do you have any questions? Do you have any thoughts? There's a Chinese place in San Francisco called Alice's Restaurant. Which, have I eaten at Alice's Restaurant? I wonder. I don't think so. So no questions from the crowd. That's okay. We're probably going to wind down here in a moment. I just maybe want to say goodbye to Ryan real quick. And that'll be nice.
That was so
you're back.
Professional. I apologize to everyone, but there was an archetype at my door.
Which archetype was it? Was it the lover?
I'm sworn to secrecy.
Oh man, I thought you were going to make me guess.
No.
Well, right on. So are there things that you want to kind of convey to people before we wind down? Like less things that you've brought back from just your journeys in general as a musician and a writer and a researcher and a psychonaut?
Try to do as much as try to do everything as thoughtfully as you can. Try not to hurt other people. And creativity can help other people and also yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a rare thing. And don't forget to laugh, because this is all pretty absurd.
Awesome. Thank you. How, if people want to listen to your music or read your book?
Yeah, the band is at hallelujahthehills.com. And the book is, you can go to astralweeks.net to learn about that.
Oh, and, you got astralweeks.com?
.net.
.net, okay.
Yeah, I think a real estate company, there's a Brooklyn real estate company called Astral Weeks who owns .com. It's very depressing, kids. Check it out.
There was one Astral Weeks domain name that I looked for. Which one was it? It was Cypress Avenue. I
Oh,
wanted
yeah.
cypressavenue.com, but it was taken.
Yeah.
Well, nevertheless, thank you so much for being a part of this.
I really appreciate you having me. Thanks for talking to me, and take care.
Yeah, man. Let me know when if you ever drag yourself out west a little bit.
Okay, I will.
All right, we'll go to Alice's restaurant.
I would like that a lot. Yeah.
And we can debrief a little bit, but I'm just gonna like say bye to everybody and tell them that you've been listening to Instrumental Breakthroughs podcast. You can find other episodes on instrumentalbreakthroughs.com or at the Tam Integration YouTube channel. And again, giving us a review on Apple iTunes is really fantastic. Big thanks to Brian of Deadheadland. Check out deadheadland.com. Big thanks to Stephen and Skylar at Livestream Remote. And just so much love and appreciation to Ryan Walsh for being with us today. astralweeks.net. Be well, everybody. Have a good one. Much love.